The pursuit of justice in Plato's dialogue, The Republic, begins in conversation with an elderly man who says that justice is doing no harm. It continues with the challenge of Thrasymachus, who says that in fact justice doesn't exist, that morality doesn't exist. And this is a serious position. And to appreciate the accomplishment of Plato, you have to take seriously the idea that morality simply doesn't exist, that it has no basis in God, in nature, in tradition. Now, the conversation becomes even richer, and the next scene is, I think, one of the finest contributions of Plato to all of political philosophy. The conversation continues when Thrasymachus leaves the conversation and another interlocutor enters, Glaucon. Glaucon will become the primary conversation partner with Socrates throughout the rest of the dialogue. When Glaucon enters the conversation, he picks up where Thrasymachus leaves off. Glaucon has a conversation with Socrates about what is morality, what is the good? And they quickly begin to ask, how can we define what the good is? And Glaucon offers the idea that some things are good in and of themselves, and some things are good because of their consequences. And it's a fundamental distinction, and it's important, and Plato articulates it here in a way that it had never been expressed, and it's a profound distinction. There are things that are good in and of themselves, regardless of their consequences, and there are things that are good because of their results, because of what consequences they entail. And Glaucon asks Socrates, what is the nature of the true good? Is it truly what's good in itself, or is it truly what results in some other outcome, whether it's pleasure or happiness or success? And to understand the rest of the Republic, in fact, to understand the entire political philosophy of Plato, you need to understand that distinction between something that's good in and of itself and something that's good because it entails good consequences. Because Glaucon will pick up where Thrasymachus leaves off, and the idea that there isn't morality, there's simply interest, to say that justice is a good because it has good consequences. And the entire rest of the Republic is Socrates' response, in which he'll try to defend a position in which justice, in which all of morality, is somehow that which is good in and of itself, independent of its consequences. Glaucon says, let's think about what we mean by justice. Justice is obeying the law, and the laws are created out of a combination of self-interests in competition. He says people can either do no harm or they can harm each other. And he says that harm, in fact, has seriously negative consequences. And so individuals create laws to keep each other from harming one another. This is a profound idea. Plato, in the mouth of Glaucon, somebody whose ideas he doesn't agree with here, gives very early expression to what we might call a contract view of society. Glaucon says, why do we have laws? Why do we have a state? Why do we have the social order that we have? We have it because individuals wanted to call a truce. They signed a contract. They make a compact in which they agree not to hurt each other. He says that, in a sense, society is this sort of mutual agreement of not doing harm to one another. Therefore, he says, justice isn't something that's good in and of itself. Justice is obeying the laws that come out of this compact. Justice is good because of its consequences. Justice is good because it prevents us from harming one another. And he gives a parable that expresses the meaning of this idea. The parable that's called the Ring of Gyges. He says, imagine this scenario. There was once a shepherd of a king named Gyges. And one day he was off in the wilderness tending the king's flocks when there was an earthquake and it opened up a chasm in the ground. And he went inside and there was a giant bronze horse. And inside of it there was a corpse. And he took nothing from this grave except a ring which was on the finger of the corpse. And later he was standing around in the bureaucratic meeting where the king's shepherd talked about their sheep, and he was bored and started playing with the ring, and he turned it. And when he turned the bevel towards the inside, he became invisible. Now, this invisibility gave him enormous power, because now he could do whatever he wanted without anyone knowing that it was him. In other words, he could behave however he wanted and there were no consequences. There was no damage to his reputation, and there was no risk that he would be imprisoned for doing anything wrong. Well, what would you do if you had this kind of power? This Gyges, this former shepherd, quickly used it to amass riches, to kill his enemies, eventually uses it to seduce the queen, kills the king, and takes over the kingdom. He uses this power to pursue his own interests. And Glaucon is saying that this is what society would be like if we didn't have consequences, if the laws didn't establish punishments. And justice is simply obeying the laws that we've created because you want to avoid the punishments. You want to avoid the consequences. And the parable illustrates this by saying what would happen to any of us if there were no consequences to our actions. Nobody behaves justly in and of itself. They do so to avoid the consequences of disobeying the law. And that's why we've created society. That's why we've created law. That is the very nature of political order.